Avalon Cablevision proudly presents for its fourth consecutive season, Sports Personalities. And now here's your host, Ted Patey.
Joining us tonight on Sports Personalities is a gentleman who's been involved in sports in St. John's for the past 35 years. He has helped softball Newfoundland grow to be what it is today, and he's also taken part in other sports as a player, coach, executive. He's a former president of Softball Newfoundland, and he's also the founder of the Newfoundland Labrador Wheelchair Sports Association, and also the gentleman that introduced the pitching machine to softball in Newfoundland. Joining us tonight is Peter Harvey. And Peter, welcome to Sports Personality. It's certainly a pleasure to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here, Ted.
Peter, been involved in sports for the past 35 years in St. John's and in Newfoundland. Before we get into your claim to fame, really, which is softball, let's just go back to your early days after your sports career and tell us about the other sports you were involved in.
Well, my fondest recollection of my early involvement with sport, and baseball in particular, was in the early 50s when they introduced softball, or baseball, I should say, minor baseball, at Bannerman Park. The late Jack Walsh was the main driving force behind the introduction. And it was the first time that they actually gave out uniforms. And as kids, 8 and 9-year-old kids, we really appreciate the fact that we had the uniform and marched proudly up the road. And at that time, Dewey Fitzgerald and Bill Gillis were instructing us kids at the time. No offense, Dewey, about the age difference, but we had great times. We really look forward to the ball games. And also, a fond memory is bat boy down at the old St. Pat's field and watching my favorite players. And,
I understand you had a favorite sports personality.
Well, I can say it now. Sunday afternoons at times, instead of being in Sunday school, I was down sneaking in under the right field fence to see my favorite ball player, who was Gordon Breen, Mr. Baseball. He was, you know, my pride and joy. And if Holy Cross played, I made it a point to be there, you know, even though, you know, I had other ball players that I admire, but Gordon's stood out as my favorite over the years.
And Peter, looking at Gordon Breen play baseball, I guess that helped you quite a bit too.
It did, but I never professed to be anything near what Gordon was over the years, you know. But I've played against Gordon as years went by, believe it or not, in the old commercial softball league. So it's quite a thrill just to be in the same field with the gentleman.
So was your baseball career just limited to your Pee-wee days down at Bannerman Park? Or?
Pee-wee baseball, basically, and then a small amount of Pony League baseball. I played a couple of years with St. Bon's later on, but softball edged in there, and that sort of took control, you know.
I understand you played some soccer in school also.
Right, I played with St. Bon's in intercollegiate soccer, and some of the players at the time were Mike Downey and Graham Hollahan, and quite an array of soccer stars.
Of course, Peter, you also made a name for yourself as a goaltender in hockey starting way back in the Pee-wee days.
Right. Well, my first introduction to goaltending, outside of being on the pond growing up as a kid, I played 1 year of Pee-wee hockey, and then mainly on an unorganized basis I was involved with hockey later on until I hit intercollegiate hockey, where I played with St. Bon's and also with Bishops, then junior hockey with the Filians and St. Bon's, and on up through them with St. Bon's Senior.
Did you ever have the chance to win the ball trophy?
Yeah, unfortunately, though, the only opportunity we did have, we lost the ball trophy to Memorial University in the second overtime, and I won't forget that in a long while, but that's the closest I've come to being on a ball trophy team.
And Peter, you played some goaltending, I understand, for the Capitals too?
Actually, I was just filling in at the time, you know. I never professed to be that good a goaltender, but I worked awful hard at it, you know.
Okay, well, let's just switch over to softball now. First, as a player, and you had quite a bit of good success in softball.
Yeah, I've been playing, well, I'm the longest active member in the Civil Service Softball League, which is the second oldest league in the city, 27 years old, and we're right in the midst of our finals now, and It's a great sport, and I'll keep playing. I'll try the old timers or the slow pitch when I turn 50, but I'm only a boy at 43, so I'm still going to stay with the senior B and the fast pitch.
Sure, yeah, and of course after the senior B and the fast pitch, and then after that there's always the slow pitch league that's good for another 30, 40 years.
Well, to be quite frank about it, Ted, slow pitch is the game in Newfoundland today. It's taken over in terms of participation. And it's a rarity now to see a fast pitch league. I think we have around 3 or 4 in St. John's now, counting the senior. But slow pitch is really a game that anyone can play from 9 to 59, you know. And it's great fun. Everybody's involved. Everybody gets to hit the ball, and it's a joy, you know.
A lot of the other players that came up through the leagues with you, I guess, played senior softball here in St. John's also.
Right. Reg Dillon, for example, and Loyola Mackey, and a lot of other good ball players started out in the Civil Service League. And I played with Kev Beresford and Dave French and Bruce LeGros, and those guys played in the Commercial League at the time in Kelly's Brook before they made the new complex, and they were really good ball players. The main factor in determining a senior ball player from a mediocre B or C player was the pitching of that particular league. If you had the quality pitching, that meant you could take a team to senior, but there's an awful lot of good ball players that could have played senior, but it was sort of restricted in the number of teams that they could accommodate in the senior league, you know.
Also, Peter, while you were still playing softball, you did some umpiring.
Oh, I enjoyed umpiring, you know, and I feel the game is played for the players. There's 18 guys out there in that field that want a fair shake, and I sweat more umpiring than I did playing because I didn't want to fool anybody up. And umpiring the rules, learning the rules, is a constant learning process. And Dewey Fitzgerald and I started softball umpires in Newfoundland, and we brought in the first umpiring film ever to be brought into Canada. We brought in softball Newfoundland, brought it in. The first case book, the first umpiring manual, and we really made tremendous strides in the organizational aspect and the coaching and the instructional aspect of the umpiring with clinics and the like.
And of course, Peter, you also served on the executive position with the St. John's Senior Softball League and Softball Newfoundland.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a very short stint with the St. John's Senior League, you know. But Softball Newfoundland, I've served for treasurer for 3 years and secretary for 2, and I had 2 years as president of Softball Newfoundland.
Of course, one of the big things that happened during your reign as president, you introduced the pitching machine for the first time in the province.
Mm-hmm. Well, in our climate, Ted, as you can appreciate, it's a tremendous wear and tear on a pitcher's arm because it's such a short season and the climate is cold, and the batting practice takes an awful lot out of the pitcher. So the summer games were coming up in the following year, and we thought it would be a good idea to have the pitching machine, and it worked out quite well, you know.
And you just getting back to umpiring, Peter, when a guy umpires in softball or any sport, there's got to be some funny incidents that's happened during those umpiring days.
Yes, I can recall an incident out in Stephenville where I had an indicator in one hand and a bag of sawdust in the other, and between pitches the rain was so bad we'd just go out and sprinkle the sawdust in front of home plate so we could get the game in, because as you can appreciate, we had people come from St. John's and Grand Falls and Bjorn Peninsula all the way to Stephenville for a tournament, so we just couldn't say, hey, let's wait and pick it up on Tuesday when the rain holds up or whatever. We had to go then, and that was a really comical sight to see the umpires with a bag of sawdust in one hand and sprinkling it, you know.
I understand there's another funny story involving Dewey Fitzgerald. Yourself and Dewey.
well, Dewey is a really funny guy, and he can write a book on all the different things that have happened that are funny in sport, and I wish he would, really. But one in particular that Dewey makes reference to quite often is the fact that I had to pick him up, and he said, Pete, I was delayed. This guy phoned me from out around somewhere, and I said, what was the problem? He said, well, the coach, he said, I'm coach. He said, and you're the umpire of softball Newfoundland, referring to Dewey. And he said, I got 3 men on third base. And I said, what did you tell the guy, Dewey? And Dewey said, I told him to fire the coach for having 3 guys on third. Right?
You know, you mentioned Dewey being a funny guy. I was at a baseball induction last week, and D. Murphy was MC, and D. put in a little quip that he can remember Dewey babysitting him when he was little. So anyway, when Dewey finally got his chance to come up to the mic, the first thing Dewey says, you know, I can never remember when D. Murphy was little. Mm-hmm. It was really cool, right?
Never tried out with Dewey when it comes to little things like that, right? You know.
Yes. Peter, you've also coached in softball too.
Yeah, I coached in baseball, minor baseball, and softball, but for a number of years with the civil service. Since the early 60s, I've coached teams like Newfoundland Hydro and Fire Department and Fisheries, and a lot of good memories there. I enjoy that aspect of the game. You know, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes in terms of strategy. And with the level 1 and level 2 coaching programs that Softball Canada had now, there's a wealth of knowledge there, and if you utilize it to the fullest, you can win a fair number of games just on technique alone, you know.
And of course, you've been made an honorary lifetime member of Softball Newfoundland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was very proud of that. And that happened during my last year as president of Softball Newfoundland.
Yes, and Peter, also, I just want to get back to umpiring for a minute, because there was quite a controversy there just a few years ago when one of our umpires wasn't allowed to umpire in a national tournament because of his beard, or?
Well, that was Len King. Len was a very qualified umpire, and we recommended that he be the Newfoundland ump to participate in the officiating of the senior nationals. And because he had a beard, the umpire-in-chief, Ed Bitts, out in Saskatoon, said no way. And it was quite a controversy over it. And my brother out in BC, Dave, sent me a clipping. And also Barbara Fromm of CBC interviewed both Len and I on the radio. But unfortunately, the end result was that the beard had to go where Len didn't, you know. So you win some, you lose some, right?
Of course, Peter, you have the privilege, too, to umpire in 2 national championships, Canadian National Softball Championships.
That was sort of a crowning jewel, and after going through many provincial tournaments and senior caliber ball down here, when I went to Hull, Quebec in '77, it was a real thrill to be up there and see the caliber ball at national tournaments. You had to be so much sharper, so much alert, and try to anticipate what might happen, you know. And those guys, and the speed of the pitchers was phenomenal, really.
Mm-hmm. Peter, our time is running short, and I want to talk to you about the Newfoundland Labrador Wheelchair Sports Association, plus a number of other items that we haven't touched on yet. And would you be so kind to come back next week, and we'll do part 2 of your interview?
Fine, Ted.
Our guest tonight on Sports Personalities has been Peter Harvey, who's been involved in sports in St. John's for the past 35 years. Peter will join us again next week for part 2. Join us then. Good night.
Avalon Cablevision proudly presents for its 4th consecutive season, Sports Personalities. And now here's your host, Ted Patey.
Welcome back to Sports Personalities for part 2 series of the Peter Harvey sports career. And Peter is back again this week, joining us for part 2. And Peter, thanks for coming again for the second week. Actually, we haven't left the set, but it appears that we just come back for the second week. So last week we were talking about your softball career. Let's just stay with that for a while, because you established one of probably the biggest awards we've seen in softball in Newfoundland, and it's the Bernard Connolly Award for outstanding services to minor soccer. Mm-hmm. Just tell us about how that got started.
Well, the Gord Crawleys and the Eddie Costigans and Gary Corbett's and those people up in Holyrood can certainly attest to the fantastic job that Bernard Connolly did in his over 20 years involvement with minor softball up in Conception Bay Central. And he done it in a very unassuming way, and he took money out of his own pockets, many at a time, and drove kids throughout the island. And during the hosting of the 79 Canadian Senior Men's Championship, I had the honor of presenting the first award presentation to Ken Chabelle of Placentia. And it's an award that's basically given for outstanding service to minor softball. And there's no fanfare or no glory in minor sport. You find it at the senior level. And for a person to dedicate so much of his life to minor softball, that meant a lot to me. And I was glad when the executive agreed to back me on that.
And Peter, is the Bernard Connolly Award still awarded today for outstanding achievement?
That's right, it still is. It's a beautiful trophy.
Peter, not many people may know this, but you were also one of the co-founders of the Constable William Moss Memorial Softball Championship, which is quite big right now.
Yes, Ted, I'm very proud to say that I've been involved with Gary for a number of years, and he's a tremendous individual, and he's done an awful lot for the youth of our city, and in particular the minor softball kids with the Moss tournament. And at the time when the crime unit was starting to get underway, Gary was looking for ideas as to how they could promote it and become more involved with the kids. And I said to Gary that as a kid, I used to have a paper route, and I used to deliver the evening telegram to Constable Moss's family on University Avenue. And when the riot started out in Badger and he was killed, that always stuck in my memory. And I said, why not a tournament in his memory? And Gary has taken the ball and gone with it and made, done a tremendous job in promoting that tournament and the crime prevention unit in general.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the Constable William Moss, talking about Constable William Moss, Peter, I don't think anybody is more aware of the incident than myself, coming from Badger and being in high school at the time and having witnessed the riot. It wasn't, it wasn't a nice thing to look at, and it was sad. And when we talk about the Constable William Moss Memorial Softball Championship, I know what it's all about, right? I know the feeling, and it's become a big tournament. And Constable Gary Brown was telling me just this past summer that the pressure is now on to carry the tournament to different centers across the province rather than just being in St. John's.
That's true, Ted. I understand now that they have representation from Labrador and also from Corner Brook. So if Gary Brown has anything to do with it, it will continue to grow and prosper, I'm sure.
And of course, Peter, the caliber of play from the final game we saw this year is just tremendous.
It is. It's excellent. And it's great to see the young constables out there moving with the kids and saying, hey, these guys are just like you or I. They're here to help me,
Peter, before we leave softball, I recall another incident that happened during your term, I think was as president, and as regards of the Bill Dibling story.
Yeah, Bill Dibling was an American who coached the White Knights senior softball team. And Ford Metcalf was on the go then, and Junior Rumsey and a few of the guys. But to make a long story short, we played in Bannerman Park. And that night we had been losing quite a number of softballs. So Stan Murphy was there, happened to be at the game. And I said, Stan, he knew I was doing the plate. Would you mind going down and picking up, 4 or 5 balls, right, down at the store? So he obliged and came back, and sure enough, those were gone. And finally we got down to no balls whatsoever. And so Bill Dibling threw one of his in. Anyway, a controversy arose over something or other, which resulted in Junior being ejected from the game. And after the remarks that Bill made, he was gone too. So Bill said, fine, and Danny, I'll take my ball, which he did. And no game. So we solved the missing ball problem with just terminating the game, Mm-hmm. But it didn't start out that way.
And of course,
the original intention.
And of course, your daughter Shelley was involved in another incident too.
We had a beautiful tournament going out in Shoal Harbour, out in Clarenville. People were fantastic. Everything was going perfect. We got down next to the championship game, and when I was umpiring and doing the plate, I went to get the softballs from the trunk. No keys, so we had guys going all to the outfield with rakes and everything else. And finally, the game before that, I'd given Shelley the keys to get 2 balls for start the game, and she locked the keys in the trunk. So we ended up having to get a little kid, and we took the back seat out of the car and had a little kid going with a flashlight searching around so we can open up the trunk to finish the tournament. But that was one of the more funny incidents that happened throughout, involved with the softball tournaments on the road. The other thing that sticks out in my mind is the hospitality of the people in the various centres, West Coast in particular, Bobby Seward and the Grimes and Roy Davis and Marie Knight and these people in Central Newfoundland.
Peter, with all your involvement in softball Newfoundland and as president, what would you say was your biggest accomplishment during your reign as president?
Mm-hmm. Well, I always stress the team aspect of my reign as president of softball Newfoundland. We work together as a team, as a unit, and my favorite accomplishment, I suppose, would be my involvement with the '79 Canadian Senior Men's Softball Championships, which we hosted, and we made $22,000, and we had a fantastic tournament. And Vince Withers and the organizing committee done a tremendous job, and that's something I'll always cherish, you know.
And of course, Peter, we can't forget this week you were inducted into the Softball Newfoundland Hall of Fame, the ultimate in softball.
That's right, you know. I'm very appreciative of my peers for choosing me or selecting me for such an honor, you know. And looking back, it's a lot of fond memories in softball, and it's very nice to be recognized in such a manner.
With a 35-year sports career, any regrets, anything you would have changed?
Mm-hmm. I would change the weather in Newfoundland, that's for sure. Especially where summer sports have created havoc at times with tournaments and trying to get games and everything else. But no, I enjoyed it. I suppose I could have spent more time with my kids, my wife. I know my wife Jeanette will certainly back me up on that. Another tournament this weekend, you're gone umpiring or this sort of thing, you know. But outside of involving the family more in the activity, which I couldn't always do because I was on the field from 7 o'clock in the morning until 8 at night, which is not very good for your family, you know. No, I have none, really.
Would I put you on the spot? I hadn't discussed this with you, but would I put you in that spot if I were to ask you to name the top all-star team since you've been involved with softball in Newfoundland? Who would you pick as the select all-star team?
Provincially.
Well, let's say provincially.
Well, let's hope. Provincially is kind of hard because the best softball players in Newfoundland came from Placentia, Indertown.
Yes.
Area like Southeast and Dunville and Jersey Side, Fox Harbor.
Sure.
You know.
Okay, let's stick with St. John's.
Okay.
Top all-star team.
Okay, I'd go with Pat Green catching. First base, the best glove man I ever saw down in the senior league was Eric Boogie. Patty Hearn. Second base was an outstanding second baseman. Ross Crocker was perennial all-star. I'd play him at short. And there's an awful lot of good third basemen, but off the top of my head, Randy Williams stands out. And outfield, Joe Quinlan. Pitcher, Metcalf, Lyle Mackey. There's so many outstanding pitchers, you know. Jerome Brocklehurst, Brian Brocklehurst. You can go on and on and on because not only could they play catcher or first or outfield, you could put the guys anywhere really, like, you know, Dick Davis is a fantastic catcher, Len Beersford, you know, no all-star team will be complete without Len, right? And I'm sure I'm after missing someone, but you caught me off guard on that one.
Who would you say is the best hitter you've seen in St. John's softball team?
Len Beersford, in terms of long ball and power and hurting you with one stroke of the bat. You know, I always like Ross Crocker as for consistency. You know, he was the best all-around ball player that ever came out of, I shouldn't say this in St. John's, but out of Carbonear. He was from out around Carbonear, but he's my choice for the best.
Okay, let me ask you a question now that you're going to be more comfortable with. We'll finish putting you on the spot. You started the Newfoundland and Labrador Wheelchair Sports Association, and today that has really grown.
Yeah, I'm sort of proud of that. We started very small, Jerry Sorensen and Chris Facey and Eddie Arnott, and we started at a Newfoundland Labrador Amateur Sports Federation meeting when some of the organizations were saying we don't have any sailboats and this sort of thing, right? And I don't know how, but it just clicked in my mind, well, they have so much and the other people have so little. So to make a long story short, we got a team together, we organized, we got Dick Glazell, the national coach, down, and we ended up in Calgary for the national championships, and we won 2 gold medals and 8 silver. But an interesting sidelight to that is when we got into Toronto on the way back, there was a hurricane down in the after effects of a hurricane, and we couldn't get into St. John's, and no one had any money. And, we spent it all on souvenirs, we're going right home. So they weren't too friendly in the hotel, so I phoned Don Jameson, the late Don Jameson, in Swift Current, and Andy Chatwood got on the phone, and he said, I explained the situation, how we had spent all our money, and they had no meal money or anything left hardly, right? So 10 minutes later, we got a phone call, and bang, the manager of the hotel came up and said, everything's taken care of, Mr. Jameson's office, right? And that was sort of a nice gesture on the part of the late Don Jameson,
Mm-hmm. What are some of the top sports our wheelchair athletes participate in?
Well, the racing and at the time, the wheelchair racing itself, Janet House was one of our top winners at the time, and Joe Fitzpatrick and Bernie Alexander, and we had a lot of really good athletes on the wheelchair sports team, but they were paraplegics. That didn't stop them from reaching the highest goals in that level of competition out in Calgary.
I think our wheelchair basketball team really have to prove themselves.
Yeah, but the guys on the mainland they live at the wheelchair sports year round, and unfortunately we don't have the facilities that these people have,
Of course, when we're talking about wheelchair athletes, we can't forget Mel Fitzgerald.
Oh yeah, Mel is he's an all-star in any sport. He's just a tremendous individual and a fantastic inspiration to anyone who's involved with the sport, be it wheelchair or any other sport.
One final question, Peter. You think the Toronto Blue Jays are going to make it?
I certainly hope so. They deserve it. They have the horses. If the pitching comes through, I think they'll do it.
Hey, Peter, thanks for joining us for the past 2 weeks on Sports Personalities. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Ted.
Again, joining us tonight on Sports Personalities has been Peter Harvey, a sportsman who has been involved in sports in St. John for the past 35 years. That's it for Sports Personalities this week. Join us again next week. Good night.
Discover the world, discover the land, discover the sea and the sky. Go for the spirit of scouting, catch it and open your eyes. Challenge yourself and challenge the land, and challenge the problems you find. Go for the spirit of scouting, catch it and